I'm Mayra Ceja, and you're listening to Venture Unplugged. From deep tech crypto to direct-to-consumer brands and products, each week we dive in deep into the lives and challenges of today's most successful founders and investors. New episodes launch every Tuesday. Sign up for our newsletter at ventureunplugged.com and subscribe on iTunes or Spotify. Follow me on Twitter at MyraCeja007. I'm really excited about today's episode with Nick Grossman, partner at Union Square Ventures. In this episode, we discuss how Union Square Ventures makes investments, why open protocols are so important to Web3 development, what blockchain use cases and companies are going to change the world, and why USV joined the Libra Association. This episode is brought to you by eToro and Qtum. eToro is the smartest and largest crypto trading platform in the world with over $1 trillion in trading volume per year. US customers can trade the most popular crypto assets with low and transparent fees. Best of all, you can connect with 11 million other eToro traders around the world to discuss trading, charts, and all things crypto. Create an account at eToro.com. Qtum is the first proof-of-stake smart contracts blockchain. It has been around for over 2 years and has over 4,000 nodes around the globe. If you're tired of paying high fees on other smart contract platforms, head over to qtum.org. That's QTUM.org and start building your own low-fee Solidity smart contract today. This podcast is co-presented by Blockworks Group and Republic. Blockworks Group is a blockchain events and media production company. For exclusive content and events that provide insight into the crypto and blockchain space, visit them at blockworksgroup.io. Republic is an investment platform that helps companies raise capital from retail investors. For more information, please go to republic.co. I'm so thrilled to have Nick Grossman on the show today, not only because of his passion for blockchains, open protocols, and crypto networks, but also because his portfolio size and experience truly make him an expert in this growing field. Nick has been a partner at Union Square Ventures for the last 7 years. Union Square Ventures is one of the most iconic venture capital firms, with notable investments that include Twitter, Etsy, and Twilio. Nick has helped to lead and shape the company's blockchain investments, which include Coinbase, Blockstack, Filecoin, Helium, and CryptoKitties. Prior to USV, he was at Open Plans, the incubator for startups focused on cities and data management. Nick was born in Brooklyn, graduated from Stanford University, and currently resides just outside of Boston. This episode is full of references and key terms that I encourage you all to visit ventureunplugged.com to get the links to the post mentioned. And for you crypto fans, in a couple weeks, we will be interviewing Joe Lubin and Mike Novogratz. So send me your questions on Twitter at MyraCeja007. Now, enjoy the show, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Why don't we get started today from the beginning? Walk me through a little bit of your childhood. What were you like? Where were you born?
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, here where we are. Well, we're in Manhattan. But in the early days, I think I thought I was going to be an engineer when I went off to college. I've always been interested in products and systems and how they get built. And instead ended up studying cities and urban planning and the policies that shape cities into, and public places into either places that feel good or places that feel bad. And I got sort of fascinated with this interplay between infrastructure and places and policy. If you think about, I've always thought about there's sort of a parallel between what does it take to make places feel good and what does it take to make products feel good. And it's a little bit about design, it's a little bit about engineering, but it's also about this sort of context in which that they get built. So, great public spaces are a product of the people who live in, whatever city, which is a product of the governance and the politics and the economy. And so whereas I sort of started out focusing on like, what's a beautiful building, I really got into, and sort of more of the design aspects, as the further I got into it, I got drawn into the politics of the infrastructure. And the same thing happened to me on the tech side. So I've always liked, digital products and design. And the more I got into, the craft and the business of building digital products, the more I got drawn into the underlying mechanics and policies and infrastructure and everything that sort of makes it tick. So that all of that drew me into becoming fascinated by sort of the open source world, open standards, the politics of tech platforms, governance, all of the tech policy, all of the stuff that sort of you never think about that makes the experiences that we have every day possible. So that's a long way of saying, where I came from and how I got into this, and it's a little bit of a roundabout story. But if you think about applying all of that to sort of cryptocurrencies and blockchains, and even just working in the tech sector, generally today, it's all about rethinking the governance fabric of technology, whether that's on the computing side or on the money side. And so I've just since the beginning have really been drawn into this whole space, and it fits with concepts that I've been studying for a long, long time.
Talk to me about a few of your past investments. Can you walk us through a deal?
Sure. I've been here at USV for a long time, probably like about 7 years, I guess, now that I think about it. So I've seen a lot of deals come through. There are so many amazing companies in our portfolio and amazing companies that I've worked with. People talk a lot about the pitch process and, what is it that gets a deal done? And here at USV, we don't have a sort of a voting process or an organized consensus process. It's a conversation, and it's about chemistry. And every so often, an entrepreneur will come in and have the room so captivated that we're just buzzing with energy afterwards. And that's happened a number of times in a number of different ways. So I remember when Splice, which is a company that builds tools for audio producers, came in, and Steve, the entrepreneur behind Splice, this was pre-product. It was just an idea, and his idea was that music is just sort of source code, just like code, and that there should be a GitHub for music where you could have magical open source collaboration around the primitive elements of music, so that people who are making digital music can collaborate better and make things better and work together better. And all of us just lit up and we're like, of course, and we got to make that happen and let's do it. And we just instantly decided that just felt right, and we did it. And it was a faster yes than I think maybe we've ever gotten to. Another one, this one's going way back, but we're investors in a company called Cloudflare, which is a well-known company in internet security and performance. And they run something like 10% of global internet traffic through their servers today. And I remember when we first met the team there back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013, our thinking at the time coming out of the meeting was, wow, this is such a powerful platform, because it sits in such an important position in the stack. It's going to be really important for this team to manage that responsibility in a good way. And Cloudflare is in the news often because they are sort of protectors of free speech, and they also are in a position to sometimes make calls about what content goes up or doesn't go up. And recently in the news, they've gotten been in the spotlight for that. And I've continually been impressed with how that team has managed to make principles-based tough calls about managing the powerful position that they sit in. It's not an easy thing to do. And as it gets us more towards sort of the blockchain space, so much of the thinking behind crypto and the blockchain has been, let's take power out of the hands of companies, right? It's tech companies and financial intermediaries, occupy a place of a lot of power. And, a lot of the thinking around protocol design is to move functionality from companies to protocols, where, instead of a company making decisions about, what users to kick off or what content to censor or what transactions to allow, if you move that into a protocol, that you're taking away that choke point. You're also taking away, a place that can be manipulated and instead can be replaced with protocols that can be trusted. all the time. And so Blockstack, one of our portfolio companies that well, and Munib was just on the podcast, has this tagline of "Can't be evil," and it's a play on Google's "Don't be evil." And I think that's the ethos. A big part of the ethos of the crypto and blockchain space is to just go from a company to a protocol, take those tough calls out of the hands of companies, and to the extent possible, build them into protocols. And so it's a long way away from tell me about a deal that you liked, but I think there's so many ideas that have led us up to our interest in sort of crypto and blockchain space, and a lot of it comes from our experience working in the traditional startup space as well.
Investing in crypto companies and blockchain companies, it's a very still new concept for a lot of investors. Can you walk us through how you view this space from an investor and return perspective?
Yeah, it for certain is different. And the best crypto assets are not companies at all. They are just assets that exist. And if you look at the surge that Bitcoin has had recently, it is as many other new projects come on. One of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is that it just exists. It's becoming to the point where it's just sort of like water or air, and you couldn't stop it if you tried. And that's an incredible. Now Bitcoin had the advantage of starting very small and very quiet with no fanfare and just growing, emerging, and that has grown more as an open source project and as a phenomenon, and now as an open sort of asset. And it has taught everybody about the power of protocols that can hold transactional state and can hold hard value. And so the question then is, what other things can we bring that architecture to? And I think a lot of the, from our point of view as investors, well, there's certainly a part of it which is investing in public, mature crypto assets like Bitcoin and others. And then part of it is looking for other places where that architecture could work. And I think what's interesting about it is making the leap from something started by a small group of people to, becoming something more like an open source phenomenon. And not very many projects have done it. I would say for sure, obviously Bitcoin, Ethereum has crossed, and a lot of this has to do with sort of the regulatory lens, and is there a single promoter behind a project, and that has weight on whether something is a security or not, but it also shapes what is it like to invest in something. So oftentimes at the beginning, we're investing in things that either are startup companies or look like them. But over time, I think the way that you invest in the space begins to look very different because projects launch. Once projects launch, if anything's going well, people start to build around them. If there's an open sort of governance process, other groups and people start to have input and control, and so what it means to be an investor in this space is very different than a traditional VC startup investing, and I can't claim that we have mastered this by any stretch. I think a lot of the folks who are heavily involved in the crypto space are inventing new ways to be venture investors and community members at the same time. And that takes you out of the role of just a private relationship with a board, let's say, on a company, to maybe a private relationship with some group that's building on a protocol, and then maybe a public role in the broader community, whether that's participating in other activities financially or participating in governance in other ways. A lot of investors are financially transacting both in the private markets and also in the public markets. So it just has really opened up a whole new world of how to be a private market investor, a public market investor, and an open source community member, sort of all at the same time. And so a lot of new stuff happening.
Now, USV was very early on and bullish about the Bitcoin blockchain community. Were you personally also very bullish on Bitcoin? When was the first time you heard about Bitcoin?
So I remember hearing about Bitcoin at an O'Reilly Media event back in, 2010 or so. And at that time, I didn't pay it much attention. There was a session on, what is a Bitcoin or something like that. And I didn't attend, and I probably should have. We started paying attention to it here, probably 2011 or 2012, as I don't remember sort of where the prices were, but it was clear that Bitcoin was more than just a curiosity, and it had a lot of activity around it. Just for context, we invested in Coinbase, I believe it was in the beginning of 2013, in their Series A. And if you look back at the writing that we did on the subject at the time, one of the big aha moments, well, it was clear that there was a big, vibrant, active community around this that was very engaged, and there was something real going on. And then I think one of the things that really triggered a broader interest for us was when we realized that Bitcoin wasn't just I'm saying in air quotes, a digital currency, but it was also very similar to an internet protocol. And my partner Albert wrote a post back in, I think it was 2013, called Bitcoin as Protocol, which at the time seemed like a big deal, where we're like, wait a second, guys, this Bitcoin thing feels like, the next generation of internet protocols. And so we started to think about it not just as digital currency, but also as kind of a computing primitive and another type of layering on the internet. My colleague at the time, Joel Monegro, wrote a post called Flat Protocols, which got a lot of attention and is controversial in some ways, but basically made the point that yes, this is another layer of internet protocols, and the unique feature here is that you can actually capture value, economic value in that protocol, which, if you had the opportunity to invest in the IP protocol back in the, 70s or whenever it was that it was really getting formed, that would be an incredible investment. And, these cryptographic protocols, have the potential to become, global open technology standards with an economic, component. So anyway, that was the beginning of when we started getting interested in it, and have evolved our investing strategy around it over the course of the last 6 years or so, and have invested in Coinbase to start, and then a bunch of projects that we're building around the sort of cryptocurrency space at the time, and then prior to when creating your own tokens became a big thing, in 2017. And since then, we've also backed a number of projects that are developing new protocols in a few different categories, and also funds that are giving us a broader exposure to actual crypto assets. So we've really, maybe we've moved. We were a little bit earlier than most venture funds, but probably a little slower than some of the other more dynamic crypto hedge funds, which have a very different operating structure. But we've been evolving our investing kind of approach around the space, over time, because it presents, new challenges for investors and new ways of working, new ways of thinking.
And what are the use cases that excite you in this space?
Well, I just led an investment in a project called Helium earlier this spring, which is a crypto-powered telecom network. And that one ticks a lot of boxes for me because it is critical infrastructure that should be and can be an open standard deployed widely and globally, and doesn't need a single company behind it, to do the deployment. And so Helium is developing this low power, long range wireless protocol that's good for IoT use cases where end devices have a small chip in them that doesn't need a very big battery and can last a long time and can use the network at very low cost. And operators of the helium hotspots, earn tokens in exchange for plugging a hotspot into their internet and broadcasting this long-range public wireless network. And that's for me the perfect kind of example of what can you do differently when you, instead of building a proprietary black box closed system, you take a crypto economic model at the core and you're able to turn it inside out. And so, this is not going to work for everything, but I think there are a lot of layers of the networking and computing stack that can be turned into open protocols and can become widely adopted in a way that's much bigger than a single company. And building those sort of from the ground up is happening sort of in the Web3 side of things. The other concept that really excites me here in general is interoperability, and the idea that, again, back to this idea that you're not building a company with a proprietary architecture, you're building an ecosystem with an open architecture, and you can use a crypto asset to tie it together. You start to think really differently. And so our other portfolio, Dapper Labs, which is the makers of CryptoKitties, has built this seemingly very silly, online game, where people breed and trade digital cats. But really what they're pioneering is, gameplay and consumer engagement around portable digital assets. My favorite anecdote is, someone created a website called Kitty Hats where you can go plug in your CryptoKitty and buy it a hat, and now the cat owns the hat. And, nobody, the makers of Kitty Hats didn't have to ask any permission to build on top of the CryptoKitties, platform. And you start, I think there's a potential for, layering and connectivity between projects in a completely permissionless way that was never possible before. And all of what you're seeing in the sort of decentralized finance space, especially what's on Ethereum, is a lot of interplay between open financial protocols and the permissionless, interoperable, layerable nature of that is really incredible, and I think is one of the key components and building blocks of this whole space that I think is going to unlock like the most new stuff. And you could argue that CryptoKitties is sort of just a silly game for right now, and you could argue that the DeFi space is just sort of on a cloud, interacting with itself and not connected to the real world. But to me, both of those are actually important proof points that an interoperable, layerable, open, asset stack is an important idea. I really believe in that.
Now for a quick word about our sponsors, and we'll be right back. eToro's crypto trading made easy. It's one of the largest and smartest trading platforms in the world with low fees. Join 11 million other traders and create an account at eToro.com. In addition to being one of the best smart contracts blockchain in the world, with extremely low fees and easy-to-use platform, Qtum's proof-of-stake system lets anyone stake with as little as a fraction of a Qtum. To learn more and start building today, go to qtum.org.
Can you talk to us a little bit about USV's role in Libra? I know you guys wrote a recent post, but maybe for our audience you can go into a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, sure thing. So we are, we've signed up to become initial members of the association. We're at a very, very early stage of this project where, it's not even fully formed as an association yet, and we're in the process of working with the other members, to sort of design the association and hopefully get it off the ground. The reasoning behind getting involved in this project, and we laid this out a little bit at the post on our blog, is that if you think about the evolution of the crypto stack, if you will, from sort of a finance 2.0 to a web 3.0, moving left to right, The farther we get towards consumer use cases, this is, many people in the world, interacting on this technology and finance stack, the more infrastructure we need to build to make that possible. And so, I mentioned CryptoKitties and sort of the DeFi stack. Like, you don't need a whole lot of infrastructure to make that work, but it's also not accessible to that many people. And as of today, we don't have a mainstream web browser with crypto built in. We don't have a mainstream phone with crypto built in. And we have very few mainstream applications with lots of users with crypto built in. And until all of those things happen, we're not going to get to sort of mass adoption of not just any one currency, but this whole architecture. And so the promise of Libra is that it brings the crypto architecture to many people. And our view on it is that our role is both as investors, and we think there's a economic opportunity in participating in the association, also as supporters of the broader ecosystem. Really, we think that this project has the potential to bring many millions of users onto the platform and into this more general architecture. And also, this is a project going to be a collaborative project with a lot of design decisions that can go one way or the other. And so we wanted to have a seat at the table to participate in the governance and the technical design as that gets ramped up. And again, all of that is very, very early, but that's why we're involved.
Can you talk a little bit about any regulatory challenges with that?
Well, I think the biggest regulatory challenge with this project is, Facebook's general reputation, and there were hearings down in DC right after the project was announced, and obviously a ton of pent-up negativity about Facebook that related to and not related to this particular project. I think for this project to succeed, it has to get real independence and separation from Facebook. And at least initially, the foundation or the association is being set up, such that it has an independent membership and independent governance, and Facebook is just one of the members of the group. And I think that's important. And over time, that will have to get more real. And we talked earlier about how a lot of crypto projects can start within a company, but then need to really, expand beyond the starting company over time. That needs to happen, and that needs to become real. And so that is probably issue number one. And then, I think there are going to be design questions around the architecture of the network and illicit problems like illicit transactions and AML and anti-money laundering rules and know your customer rules, and all of the things that once you start talking to traditional sort of currency and financial regulators, those are the concerns that they have. And in the case of Libra, if this really does come to become a global platform, I think that's really the first set of regulatory questions that comes up. So I think all of that to me says that I think the final product will be shaped by those discussions and whatever constraints are sort of built around the project, whether that comes from regulatory side or from partners, or business development or whoever else. So I think what's interesting about Libra is that it will have a set of design constraints that many other cryptocurrencies or things like cryptocurrencies, if you don't think Libra is a cryptocurrency, won't have. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think it'll end up having a certain feature set which fits for the use cases that it can accomplish within the constraints that it sits in. So it's all that is to say is we're very, very early on in the development of the project, and I think over time, more of these issues will kind of get surfaced and will get worked through.
So in this post-ICO craze environment, what are your thoughts in terms of the funding space? So we recently saw the first Reg A Plus approved by the SEC. Do you think more companies are going to be choosing that route, or is it back to traditional fundraising from VCs?
Good question. I don't think the fundraising question is settled. We've got however many projects we have in our portfolio, and I think they've all developed themselves in different ways. And I don't know that and if I look at the broader landscape, nobody has settled on a standard yet. And it's very different inside the United States and outside the United States. And so you still have a mix of, companies raising equity, possibly launching a token at some later date. You've got companies or projects developing tokens as part of some other, sort of more traditional project and maybe not selling them. The Reg A Plus window seems to be open at the SEC, and both of the companies or the projects that did Reg A Pluses are our portfolio companies, Blockstack and Props, and so we've seen that process from the inside, and it's encouraging that they've made it through, and that both from a legal perspective and a product perspective, designs have made it through that process that we think will work for both projects. But I don't know that means it will be the right architecture for every project at all. I think I worry that the sort of regulatory cloud that's over the crypto markets in the United States is ultimately going to hurt the U.S. market for innovation here, both from projects and other forms of infrastructure like exchanges. And we're definitely seeing a trend of projects moving overseas, teams moving overseas, sales going overseas, U.S. purchasers being excluded from different kinds of sales at different times. And so, and a ton of investment activity happening, in Asia in particular, but outside of the U.S. So, there are some signs of light. The SEC Commissioner Peirce just wrote a post a couple weeks ago advocating for some sort of a safe harbor for the development of new projects. I think that's promising. So it's definitely things are happening, and the door is not just completely shut. But I do worry about the U.S.'s position in the overall market.
Do you think there's still opportunity there, or do you think we're still too far behind?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's still opportunity for sure. There may be, as an example, our portfolio company, Props, the project is called Props, incubated by a company called YouNow. They went through the Reg A Plus process, and their token is used inside of their social video app for reputation, and it's almost like loyalty capital, sort of a little bit like loyalty points and a little bit like equity capital. And since they've launched it in the platform, it has boosted engagement, in a substantial way, and that's very promising. And if you think about, especially token projects that are oriented towards maybe more conservative participants like corporations and brands, it's possible that the kinds of tokens that come through the Reg A Plus process that are appear to be safer, from a regulatory point of view to brands, could be really just the right thing. So there's that's like a sort of a small sliver of the market, and it's not radical and not as radical and transformative as some ideas, but in some ways that's the door that's the most open here in the United States, and I'm sure people will find other ways as well. I mean, I think the other important thing to remember is that the SEC has also put out guidance about tokens, and it's possible to launch a token in consistent with their guidance without necessarily going through a Reg A plus process. And I think we'll see projects doing that as well. So it is possible, but it's just a cloud. If you look at projects like Binance, companies like Binance with their Binance token, which is becoming a bigger and bigger part of that exchange and how it works. You can't do that as a U.S. company, and maybe that's good, but it also means that there's a company out there that is not in the U.S. that is able to take a much more aggressive strategy that may be the more innovative and creative and effective strategy, for building a big ecosystem. And so that's where I sort of worry, is that we may see some of the most creative ideas for how to use tokens in the context of an ecosystem and an economy. We may see the most creative uses not happen here in the U.S., and I hope that doesn't happen.
What projects are currently exciting you?
It's funny. I think it's been all about Bitcoin in the last, couple months, and I'm excited by many more projects. But it's hard to have that conversation without talking about Bitcoin and how much staying power it's been, and how there does seem to be a lot of activity up and around the edges. I mean, that said, I still very much believe 100% that new things are going to get built that serve very, very different use cases. So we've got the Filecoin project, which is one of the earliest ones that we backed. That's a little bit more like Helium, like I mentioned earlier, which is more on the computing side and more on the computing infrastructure side. And that project is actually making great progress, and we're going to see that launch. I'm excited to see projects like Cosmos and Polkadot launch, because I think connectivity and interoperability between blockchains is actually really important. And also so many, and just more generally, like the whole class of proof of stake systems is really just getting tested for the first time, and I think we won't know for a little while like how well that works, but I think it's very promising. We've got a project we work closely with called Algorand, which is a proof of stake network which is putting up really good numbers in terms of throughput and performance, and so for across all of those, I think the next 12 to 24 months are going to be really interesting to see what gets built on them. And we really are just at the point where there was the 2017 ICO bubble hype cycle, then there was the winter of 2018, and now we are in maybe something of a spring. I think Bitcoin has been, DeFi on Ethereum and Bitcoin really have been the two stories coming out of that. But I'm really excited because so much of the new stuff that's been getting built over the last 18 months is either just about to launch or has barely launched. And I think it's going to be a little while before we see the fruit that bears. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
So you work with a lot of entrepreneurs. What is the piece of advice that you find yourself giving most often?
Well, it's... I think the advice that we give most often... So we've, aside from working in the crypto space, which we've been doing for the last 6 or so years, the theory of investing at USV has always been around networks. What does it take to build a network? And a network can be a social network, it can be a marketplace, it can be a developer platform that has a lot of data and running through it. It can be something that sits inside of industry, facilitating a lot of B2B transactions. There's a lot of different ways that you can design a network. And one of the most powerful aspects of networks is if you can get a lot of users and a lot of sort of activity on them. Once you've got the core network built and it is robust and big, you can start to layer a lot of additional products, services, tools, functionality on top of it. And it is easy to look at an early network and imagine all the things that you're going to build on top of it and want to build them tomorrow. And I think the advice that we most often hear ourselves giving is to really focus on the core, muscle of the network, the core offering, the core value proposition, the core piece of functionality, and make that as good as possible and get the network to be as big as possible before trying to add too much to it. And that comes up again and again. And so we're always pleasantly surprised when we meet entrepreneurs who can articulate a long-term vision of what can happen once a network is sort of in place, but also, understand the amount of effort that goes into just getting, the first piece, well deployed.
And so before we jump into rapid fire questions, I want to end on a happy note with one of my favorite questions. When was your last moment of peak happiness?
Peak happiness. That's a great question. I think at the moment my peak happiness comes from my kids. I've got young kids in elementary school, and I love hanging out with them. So I was coaching my son's, baseball game yesterday, and I was playing piano with my daughter, on Saturday, and there are just beautiful moments with kids, especially at really at every age. And so I feel lucky that I get a peak. I do get I experience moments of peak happiness sort of on a regular basis with my kids, and I'm very thankful for that.
That's amazing. And so let's jump right into rapid fire questions.
Sure.
How much do you sleep?
I sleep I need 7 or 8 hours.
What is your favorite book?
My favorite recent book was probably A Gentleman in Moscow, because it just painted such a beautiful picture and stuck with me. I don't know that I have a favorite book of all time.
Outside of work, what is your biggest hobby?
I coach baseball, and I'm like a DIY handyman. I love doing, making and breaking things. I have power tools at home, and I try to use them as much as I can.
What is your biggest life hack?
I was going to say meditation. That's so cliche. Exercise and meditation are the two things that make me feel the best, and I don't do them as much as I should.
Do you believe in God?
Probably not in a traditional sense. I grew up in a mixed religion household and wasn't ever brought up in a traditional, religious environment. I do believe in something bigger, but I don't know what it is.
Who are founders that you admire?
I'll go with Jason Fried from Basecamp. Was one of the first founders that I ever started following, and taught me a lot about the web. Matthew Prince and Michelle Zatlin from Cloudflare.
What is one thing that you believe in that most people don't?
That's a great question. Well, maybe I'm an optimist, but I believe that if you just keep working hard every day and making little steps to make things better, you'll make progress. And I learned that lesson, the first jobs that I ever had working, in restaurants and so on. And there were moments when I wanted to, or my friends wanted to quit. And I've always felt like if you can just be helpful, you'll get somewhere. I don't know if that's controversial.
Do you believe you're lucky?
Certainly, life-wise. I don't know that I possess luck, but I've definitely been the recipient of luck and good things, and I feel lucky.
What is the biggest misconception people have about you?
It's a good question. I don't know if I know what misconceptions people have about me. I got to go find out.
What is the most significant thing you've received from a mentor?
The mentor that I think about the most is Brad Burnham, who is one of my partners here at USV, who taught me two things, or has given me two things. One is just, opened a lot of doors for me into this entire world and been incredibly supportive. But that's important, but maybe more important is, trying to apply a thoughtful, sensitive mindset to complex situations.
What is one word that you would use to describe high school Nick?
Geeky.
What do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for helping build important and good things in the world.
What do you want your children to remember you for?
A little bit of that, what I just said, but I want them to remember me being with them and helping them, doing things with them, being connected to them, and helping them with whatever challenges they encounter.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing today. I really enjoyed our talk.
My pleasure, Mayra. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to that episode. New episodes go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find me on Twitter at Mayra Ceja 007. And I'll see you next time.